Welcome back to the Community Action Partnership Podcast. My name is Jamie, and here with me today is Jesse and Kalynn. Today we're going to have a conversation about the hidden rules of economic class.
Yeah, so the hidden rules that we're going to be talking about today, the hidden rules of economic class, comes from the research of Ruby Payne, and it comes from AHA Process. And we're all certified facilitators for AHA Process. We're going to be using it straight from their book.
So let's do a quick definition of hidden rules. Hidden rules are the unspoken cues and habits of a certain group of people. Have you ever had a sense of belonging or not belonging?
Yeah, like you do something and all of a sudden you feel like you did something wrong. You don't even know what you did.
Right.
You're like, uh-oh.
And those awkward moments.
What did I just do?
Yeah, that awkward look or side eye maybe.
Like,
You may have broken a hidden rule.
And sometimes people may do stuff that is your hidden rule and break your hidden rule, and you may give them the look.
right. Because hidden rules are found pretty much everywhere in every culture. But for the purpose of this podcast, we're going to narrow that down and just talk about those hidden rules within the economic class.
Correct.
So what are the different kinds of economic classes? What are the ones we're going to be talking about?
Well, we got generational poverty, the middle
Do you want
class.
to explain what generational poverty means?
Generational poverty is 2 or more generations of a family being in poverty. It's going to be a little bit different than a situational poverty, where situational poverty is going to be an actual event or situation that happens that throws you into poverty. That could be something like a divorce or a disease or loss of employment, and that's going to, then throw you in.
And then we have middle class and wealth.
And when we talk about wealth, we're doing the same thing. This is generation after generation. It's old money, not this. I just went down to the corner store and bought a lottery ticket and won, right? Because that would throw you into situational wealth as well.
Right.
So it's those. That's why it's very closely tied to culture. It's a subset of culture because they have those shared customs and social expectations that culture has. So when we talk about these and we're talking about the classes, that's why it's really important to think we could be in one financial situation but be familiar with a different economic class because that's what we grew up with.
So one of the things that I like to touch on before we even get into this subject is the fact that we all come from different economic backgrounds, cultures, and with that comes our personal biases towards other classes.
Well, maybe we should just talk about what bias is, because it doesn't necessarily mean we need to say that that's what we're doing, but we all have biases in our life, right? Where it's those implicit biases that are inside our minds that we come from one culture, one way of doing things, and we expect that of other cultures, but when we see them not doing it, we can unconsciously judge and think that the way that they're doing something, or just have these assumptions, that's where stereotypes come from, are these biases that we have. And it can be very unconscious and we don't realize that we're doing it. And that's part of this growth process that we're doing, is becoming more self-aware and understanding that we do have these different biases within us. And sometimes they come out. And it's not necessarily that we mean to do it, but it does happen. And when it does, that's when we need to stop, pause, and take a breath and think about what we just said or what we just did. And that's where I love the quote from Maya Angelou, when you know better, do better. So even though we might be able to recognize that we did that in the past, now let's move forward and do it differently.
So let's get into what the hidden rules of each economic class are. We touched on culture, and we talked about unspoken cues of a culture. And if you haven't seen that culture video yet, go ahead and check it out. So what are unspoken cues? Like, that's that social expectation or that, way of doing things that isn't really talked about, but just, happens naturally without anybody talking about it.
Right. So remember that culture is a group of people with those common practices that gives each member a sense of belonging, right? So when we have those hidden rules, it makes us feel comfortable around each other because I just know you're going to do that. I just know you're going to say that because I'm expecting it. And when something unexpected happens that you aren't ready for, it can make you feel uncomfortable, right? So if someone comes up and does something and does break one of your hidden rules, sometimes you get that awkward feeling and you don't know how to respond to them, or you might even get a little insulted. It just depends on what rule they broke, right? Because there's all these levels, right? So you could just feel awkward, or you could get deeply insulted because it was hitting a really deep part of your culture and your identity. Okay? So that's where it's important to understand that if someone can do that to us, we could do that to someone else.
So let's dive in. Let's talk about why each class does what they do. Let's talk about the driving forces. So for generational poverty, what are the driving forces?
So the driving forces for generational poverty are going to be survival. Obviously, if you have been living in generational poverty for extended period of time, you're just living day to day and trying to make it through the day. Sometimes you don't even know if you're going to be able to eat that day, if you're even going to make it that day. So basic survival is the most important thing. That is the main driving force. You're also going to have relationships as a driving force. When you're in poverty, your relationships are almost can be all that you have. Mm-hmm. The relationships that you have to people. So you may not be able to have a car and a house, but you have your people. And so relationships are very important. And then also entertainment is going to be a driving force in poverty. Now, this is one that I think a lot of people see, and I think they judge people in poverty for it, right? Because you may see somebody in poverty buying a big screen TV, and you say, well, you can't even afford to pay your bills. Why are you buying it? But the thing is when you live in a high stress environment like that constantly, you need some type of escape from that life and that reality. And so when you're able to have some type of entertainment, laughter, it gives you that break from that. So those are the big driving forces in poverty when you live in poverty.
Going back to those relationships, it's not just the interconnectedness of, it's also a resource, isn't it?
Sure. Yeah, absolutely. Because
your people could help you get by.
Yeah.
Yeah, your car breaks down. Hey, Sam, my car's broken down. I need a ride to work. It's sure. That connectedness that way as well.
What about middle class?
I think probably the first thing I think of is when we introduce each other. Like you're at a party or you're going someplace, the first thing you ask is, hi, what do you do? You're like, my name's Kalynn. I do this. My name's Sam. I do this. I keep using Sam for some reason. And that is because that's something that's really important, is that we work hard and that we show that work. So another driving force is our achievement, showing that we have accomplished something. So getting that degree or climbing that mountain, we've shown that we have done something. We have something to show for it. And I think that also drives another driving force, which is that material security that we long for. So again, in that American culture, we have that independence is really something that we value. And in middle class, we want to show that we don't need anybody to help us get by. We can do it on our own. And when we have that house, we have those things to keep us secure and safe, and we have been able to achieve that on our own, that's a huge driving force for us.
Now, Jesse, you said that you are not familiar with wealth, nor am I. But what are the driving forces for wealth? What makes them do what they do?
I think obviously the first thing people are going to think of is financial when it comes to wealth, but it's much more than just having money in your pocket. You know, it's carrying that legacy of that money, right? So the finances you have came from your family, and you're passing it down to future generations of families. So
How stressful would it
keeping that
be?
money.
Yeah, sorry. How stressful would it be if you were the one to lose that money?
Yeah. There's also a driving force for wealth is political and social connections. I think in politics, there's a lot of power involved. And anytime that you can be involved in politics, there's a lot of influence in it. And I think also politics are more important when it comes to the wealthy class.
You can have decisions made in your direction that you want, or in your favor.
Well, and maybe it's even bigger than that, because we work at Community Action, right? Because we want to make a difference. Well, that's, I think, probably one way that they feel that they can make an influence. Not the only way, but one of the ways is to have that influence on what is happening in their sphere, right? Mm-hmm. Because that trickles down and affects everyone else. So if they can make that be that positive influence for change, that's one way that they can do it, is by gaining that power through political aspects. Well, and those social connections are also their ability to stay in those elite classes. Because if you're connected to the right people, you're going to have that opportunity for power, and that opportunity. They all tie together. Every one of these, when we think about poverty driving forces and the middle class driving forces and the wealth, they all tie together. One is because of the other. And I think that's the same thing with the social connections. It's not what you know, it's who you know, right? And that's going to help you with the driving force of the political importance and that financial importance. They all connect together.
We talked about driving forces. Let's talk about some of the actual hidden rules of the classes. Let's start off with money.
So a hidden rule of poverty when it comes to money is to be used and spent. Keep in mind, this is generational poverty, so this is learned behavior over a long period of time. A lot of the times, you're not going to have money. Or even when you do have money, you have things that money is already going to before you even get it, right? So as soon as you get it, it's to be spent on things you need to spend it on now. And also, there's times like, if you're trying to survive and you have money, you're going to spend it on what you need to survive. You're not going to think about tomorrow, Tuesday, next month. What you're thinking about is surviving today. So when you get that money, you want to spend it on what you need and what you can, because there may not be a tomorrow. You may not be able to have it tomorrow to spend it on something. So you learn the behavior of, it is accepted that when you have money, you use it and you spend it.
And then you also have that driving force of entertainment. And when you get that extra money that you weren't expecting, it might go towards that because you think you might not have it tomorrow.
Right. That goes hand in hand, like I was talking about earlier about the TV. You know what I mean? Those go hand in hand. So I have this money and I need to use it and spend it on something. Even if I've met all my needs, and I've struggled with this myself in this particular hidden rule, because it's something that's been a part of my life for a long time. Those two clash a lot. Those two they go hand in hand, as far as when I get money, even when I have all my needs met, I still want to spend my money on that entertainment. And it's so hard for me not to spend it right away. And,
think about future things
Right.
that you might want to save for.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, how is middle class different?
I think, again, we go back to our driving forces of work and achievement and all of those different things. We want to show that independence. And so we need to be able to manage that money so that we can show all of that achievement and we can have that financial security. In my family, my dad would always gather us around and we would talk about our finances. And that was a very important aspect for him so that we would grow up understanding the importance of managing our money so that in the future we could have that financial security, we could have that material security, and we could work towards something that was more than what we have here and right now.
Like retirement.
Like retirement.
And how about wealth?
Wealth, it's to be invested. If you have, that amount of money, you invest it into things so it can grow into more things and you can carry it over. And it's to be conserved. So saving that money, not spending all that fortune that you have so you can pass it on.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it's conserving that legacy. And I think also, again, going back to that influence and power, if you're conserving that money and you have the ability then to pay it forward in other ways.
Let's jump over to the topic of food. Food's pretty important. We need it daily. Sometimes in generational poverty, you don't have enough.
Right.
So how...
So we asked the question in generational poverty is, did you get enough to eat? The most important thing when you have food is, did you get enough to eat? Was it enough to fill you up? Is it going to help you till tomorrow? Because you may not have food later on, right? So like in a lot of circles in poverty and stuff, if you go to somebody's house or something and they decide to host somebody, right? We want to make sure that you got enough to eat. Not only that, but if there's food left over, we're going to give you a plate to take with you too, so you have food for later. So that's the most important thing when it comes to generational poverty is, was it enough to eat?
Mm-hmm. And middle class?
So in middle class, we ask the question, did you like it? So my first thought is like when you go to a potluck, because we do a lot of potlucks, right? We'll go, where did you get that recipe? Because quality is important. We can afford to buy food. That's a good thing. So now the next step up is the quality of the food, right? So certain kinds of food are important. So we're not just getting the basic food that you can get coupon clipping and all that stuff, although coupon clipping can go all the way up to wealth, right? Depending on how you do stuff. But we're going to look at the brand names. We're going to want the certain kind of cut of meat so that we're looking at that quality and making sure that it's good to eat.
And that leaves wealth. What's different about wealth and food?
Wealth is, how was it presented?
Right.
It's more about the presentation than it is the actual food. Now, that doesn't mean that quality isn't important. What that means is if it's got great quality, but you have presented it to me in a poor way, then, I want it presented nice, elegantly, It may even be the atmosphere, not just the food, but the atmosphere as well.
And that makes sense because, again, when you go back and think about it, they don't need food. It's not something for survival. They can get food whenever they want. They can get whatever quality food they want anytime they want it. So that no longer becomes an important part of the food realm anymore because it's commonplace for that, right? And when something becomes commonplace, I always say I have permanent objects in my house because I've set it somewhere and I've left it there forever. And then it becomes invisible. It's no longer something that stands out. Well, that's kind of the same way when you think of it, when you don't need food for survival and you can get whatever food you want anytime, then those aspects don't become as important. And so it makes sense that the next level would be the presentation or the experience of it, which if you've ever been to one of those, I was blessed one time to go on this Disney cruise and they had this like all out spread and it was The food was it was designed. It was like a piece of art. And the atmosphere, they had all of these graphics up on the wall, projections of Disney characters and all this stuff. It was a great experience. So I can see how if you don't have the need to eat, or like it's not for survival, and you don't need to focus on the quality because you can get whatever quality you want, the next level up would be to experience that.
Mm-hmm. That makes sense. So let's jump over to time and generational poverty.
So for generational poverty, the present is most important. So right now is the most important thing because tomorrow may not come. So we're making the decisions right now on the present. And also the decisions made right now are based on how you're feeling, your feelings as well. So you're not looking at ramifications of the future. You're just worried about what's going on right now in the present.
Which makes sense because you're putting out today's fire. You don't have time to think about tomorrow's
so it's
fire.
It's not a matter of like a person in poverty doesn't see that like the future is important or any of that. It's just right now I can only focus on right now. And sometimes all the bandwidth you have from being stressed out all the time from trying to survive, you can only think for right now, you know.
It kind of reminds me of triage when you're in a hospital and doctors will put patients in triage when there's these big emergencies. And so they can only focus on the ones that are life-threatening right now, and then they put the other ones who maybe have bumps and bruises towards the end. And so I kind of feel like with time, that's what happens is they triage it. And right now is the most important.
Yes, your decisions that you're making are based on what's most important right now.
What about middle class? How do they differ?
Middle class, again, going back to the driving forces and all those things, it's future forward thinking because we have those achievements that we need. We have that those material securities that we're working towards, and that takes time. Right? And so we have to plan it out. We have to think ahead and go, okay, today I need to do this, tomorrow I need to do that, so that in 10 years I can achieve this, or I can pay off my house, or I can be ready to retire.
And wealth?
Well, in wealth, time has a lot to do with traditions and history, and also the legacy that you're leaving on. So are you carrying the traditions from the past and the history, and is it going to carry on when you are gone? Your legacy is going to carry on for future. So it's not just looking at time as in my lifetime, but generations of lifetimes after me and generations of lifetimes before me.
Let's talk about education now. In poverty, what's education like for them?
So in poverty, people that are in poverty understand that education is important. But there is a common saying that I have heard, and it's just not for me, right? So we understand that college is an important step onto, your business or what you plan to do for your trade. But when you live in poverty, it may be hard because you may have families that have never been to college. And so you may not think that you are able to ever go to college, and you may just see it as abstract and not something that's a reality for you. So you're looking at education as in, I'm just trying to get through what I can right now with school. And sometimes may not even make it that far because your family unit may need you to go to work as a child in order to help support the family. So seeing college is not very important when you are trying to survive.
Whereas with middle class, it's an expectation. I struggled to get through high school. I did not like it. I felt dumb. I just did not get it because I had certain learning disabilities. But I always knew I was going to college, even though I hated the aspect of education because it was expected of me. And I remember when I first got this cultural clash of these expectations when I was in high school and I had a friend who dropped out at 16. And I didn't understand it. And she went to get married because she thought that was the next logical step for her, and she didn't need to finish her education. And for me, it was like this paradigm shift for like of thinking like you don't have to finish school. You're not going to college. It was not something that I ever even considered.
Almost foreign for you.
It was foreign, exactly. And it got me thinking. I still had that expectation, and I still went to college. And honestly, I loved college. I'm still going to college. But it opened my eyes to the fact that not everyone has to go to college, that there are some great professions out there that don't need college. It needs other kinds of things, right? Mm-hmm. But at that moment in time, as a teenager in high school, I thought everyone went to college because that was just an expectation of how I grew up.
And what about wealth?
Wealth is like, it's a tradition. Like you're going to follow what your parents did and their parents did. My father went to Harvard, and his father went to Harvard, and his father went to Harvard. So you're following that tradition. Not only that, but you are, by continuing to do that, you're maintaining those connections through those social circles. Because like we talked about earlier about social connections being a driving force. These steps, going to college, this is how you do that. And it's not just going to any college, you know what I mean? It's going to the college.
Because you're a certain benefactor there.
Right. The social connections are going to be at these colleges, you know?
It's where you can make the most influence.
Yeah, and it's important to carry that on.
Destiny, when people are looking at that in generational poverty, tell us about that.
Well, destiny in poverty, people believe in fate. Like when things happen to them, they believe that this was my fate. And that comes a lot from living in conditions where hardships happen and bad things seem to happen, and it just feels like it's fate, you know?
And I can kind of understand that when, you know, the people we've worked with a lot in that generational poverty group, I have seen people try really hard and then get knocked down by their refrigerator breaks down or their car breaks down and they can't get to work. Now they lost their job. And it's like, what's the point? Right. Because they keep facing those barriers or those challenges. So it's easy to understand how they could get that fatalistic point of view.
Yeah, and not only that, but they may have seen their mother go through it as well, or their father go through it as well, and their grandparents go as well. So they're saying, well, they all went through this, and it's not going to be any different for me.
Why even try? Kind of thing. What about middle class?
The American dream. If you work hard enough, you can get it. On the flip side of poverty with fatalism, it's believing that we have the choice. What we do today affects tomorrow. So we can change the future by the choices that we make. And sometimes there needs to be that balance, right? Because sometimes we can't change what's going to happen. We can't change that someone gets in a car accident or we lose a family member or a divorce happens or a loss. Those kind of things can't happen. We can't affect those. But we have that belief that if we work hard enough, there's that driving force again, that we can make the future better. And that's one of the things that is interesting when middle class people get shifted into the poverty situation, is we find that because of that that sense of destiny, they can move out of poverty faster than those that have grown up in generational poverty because they've not experienced blow after blow after blow. It's just been one or two blows.
And what about wealth?
when we think about it again with those influences and wanting to make a difference and the power, it's that noblesse oblige. They have been blessed with the finances to make a difference. And so they almost feel this obligation, or their sense of destiny is to pay it forward and to help those that can't. And so that's when you'll see big benefactors giving grants and starting foundations
Yeah.
because they feel like that is part of their responsibility to carry on this legacy, to have a good name, is to give back to their community.
Let's talk about worldviews really quick. When you live in poverty, let's explain what that's like.
I think if you're living in poverty, world doesn't mean a whole lot, right? The view that you have is of your neighborhood, your area that you live in, that you can control. So you may see worldview as in your neighborhood, and some of them may not have cars, they may not have vehicles to get anywhere. So their worldview is that little area that they can walk to. And what's important is what's going on in this area, not what's going on in another state or in another country. What matters is what's happening right here.
Because you talked about bandwidth, right?
Yes.
Mm-hmm. They don't have, they're focusing on the here and the now, what's happening right now. And there might be issues that they have to focus on, maybe even good issues. Not everything in life is bad. You have these celebrations. We all have good and bad days. But because their focus is the here and the now, and it's all about their community, it's harder to look outside and see what other influences are actually influencing their community. Whereas with middle class, right, it's more of a national worldview because they do have that expanse where maybe some of their job is reaching out to other communities, other cities. They travel.
Maybe they've managed that money so they can go on a vacation.
And you had mentioned that as you were moving out of poverty, you're starting to look at politics different too, where it wasn't important to you at one time and now it's becoming a little bit more.
When I was living in poverty, it wasn't important to me because it didn't affect me right now. I can only control what's going on in my world, so I'm not going to worry about what's going on with that.
Something that could affect the future when we're dealing with right now.
Yeah, as I slowly start to, and can work with any of these hidden rules. You can be in one side of one and one side of another. It doesn't, as my views and my culture starts to change a little bit, I think I start to see worldview a little bit differently now.
And wealth?
Well, I mean, that's global because they're actually having businesses and organizations that are worldwide, not just within the nation, So they're going to be looking at interconnections that also have to do with that sense of power, right?
That's more places that you can invest into and that you can buy and stuff like that, and so that just equals a bigger source of power and money.
So when we look at the global worldview, we're taking in global politics, how that affects their investments. We're looking at the global conflicts that are happening, because what if one of their companies is in that location? So they have that global worldview because it is revolving around all the things that are important in their life.
So all of these hidden rules are kind of like learned thought processes passed down. What can we gain from understanding where people come from?
There's many benefits to gain. I would say, I think you talked about it earlier at work. So when you're at work and you're working with different classes of people, when you're able to understand a little bit more about why they do what they do, why they operate the way they do, or maybe even why they think the way they do, you can break down that judgment that you may have because they do something differently, right? So take, for instance, somebody may come in for help and may be like down on their luck. They've lived in generational poverty for a long time. They don't believe that they can do anything to change their situation. And they may come in with that attitude of saying, I can't do anything about it. There may be somebody who maybe straddles more of the wealth hidden rules or middle class hidden rules that may look at that person saying that and be like, you know what I mean? And look down on them like they're, I don't know, if they're able to understand that this person feels that way because of this, and this, then you can understand and see, okay, I need to understand that this is how they feel and just try to help them where they're at. So,
and on the flip side, right, if someone is coming in from generational poverty and going into a work environment and they start interpreting things differently because of their worldview or because of where they're coming from, and someone in the middle class environment breaks one of their hidden rules, it gives them the power inside of them, that education to understand that maybe that wasn't an intentional insult, or that they weren't putting them down or whatever, but that maybe there was something else going on there.
Yeah. And being able to adapt to different areas and stuff gives you better opportunities to do I know, like I was talking earlier about jobs and stuff. And when I was working at my one job, learning the culture, I talked on another podcast about culture, but learning the hidden rules of different classes and how they operate and being able to adapt to that just opens up so many more opportunities,
And it doesn't make you any less authentically
No.
you. I mean, because when you think about it, again, we had talked about how we are part of a whole bunch of different cultures. That's what makes us uniquely ourselves. And when we're part of one culture, we have these social expectations here. When we're part of one culture, well, now we're part of the work culture. So we're going to adapt to those social expectations. And what's really helpful is when you find yourself in an awkward moment or awkward situation where okay, this is really foreign to me, I don't understand what's going on, to ask and to have someone take you under their wing, like a mentor or a guide in that. So if you're in a new work environment, you can even be humble enough to say, you know what, this is an environment I'm not comfortable in. Is there someone who can maybe show me the ropes? Mm-hmm. It's that simple, where someone just can come and you have that person to go to when you go, okay, I was in this situation. This happened. I felt really insecure. I think they were putting me down. What do you think? Or I was in this situation and everyone else seemed to know what they were doing, but I had no clue what was going on there. Or I was in the kitchen and I set my lunch down on a certain countertop and now it's gone. What happened there?
Yeah. So one of the hidden rules that we have at work, we have a full kitchen and stuff. And so the left side of the kitchen countertop, if there's food placed there, that is free for the taking. You can have any amount of it you want. If it's on the right side of the sink, then it is personal food and you're not to touch it. So we have actually had people who have set their lunch down on the left side of the sink and then went to the bathroom or something because they were planning on doing something, and then come back and have their lunch gone.
Well, that's that unspoken
right.
rule.
Now, if you came into our office as a new employee and nobody told you this rule, that would be an unspoken hidden rule that we had at work, and you could lose your lunch,
Yeah. So. And that could be a really awkward moment, or it could even be like a desperate moment going, man, I was really hungry.
Yeah, and it's in all of these, like when we're talking about all these hidden rules and stuff, this is just an opportunity also for you to maybe understand yourself a little better as well. Because I probably say a lot of us don't really think about this stuff. Like, what are my hidden rules on money? Like, what are my hidden rules on this? You just kind of do what you do, you know? And so this gives you an opportunity to kind of just really look at some of these and say, okay, maybe that is why I do this like this in this area, or I do this like that in this area. Or maybe that is also why they do that like that. So the next time you're seeing somebody do something, you're like, oh, okay, I can see why they would do it like that, you know?
And it goes back to communication again, because the best form of communication is not assumption, right?
Yeah.
If you're wondering, ask. But make sure you ask in a very kind and authentic curiosity kind of way, not, why did you do that? Why did you take my food? I had to sit down and I just went to the bathroom, you know. But just be curious, and then you can find out, and that's how you can learn and expand your own abilities to communicate within different and varying cultures and classes.
So what makes it so important to learn this stuff? Like, I know you said, communication and the, removing judgment. But if somebody came up to you and said, what do I need to know? What would you tell them?
I think for me, I gained a lot in my life by learning these hidden rules, because I was able to communicate better in different positions at work. But not only that, I was able to see myself and why I do the things I did. So like I talked about earlier, one of my biggest problems was when I got money, it was to be used and spent. And that was an unconscious thing that I did without really thinking about it. I would just get money and I would spend it. And it was like, oh, that's what you got it for, right? You might as well use it and have fun with it, you know? And I didn't really pay no mind to it, of like whether or not this hidden rule was helping me get to where I wanted to be in life, or was it like hindering me in where I was going, you know? And so I had to do some soul searching of myself to see that, hey, this isn't really helping me. I have no savings. I have no future. Every time I have money, I'm spending it on things, you know? And so for me, just understanding that this was one of my hidden rules, because I was raised through poverty and stuff, and I lived in it. And that's kind of a culture that I adapted to.
Mm-hmm.
I think I heard you say, I'm hearing you say, it limits you. And so,
well, I don't want to say it limits you, because I don't want to act like any of these are right or wrong or anything like that. I just want to say, for me personally, that hidden rule that I had on money was limiting me from getting to where I wanted to be, which was financially secure. Okay. And in order for me to do that, I needed to understand that there's nothing wrong with me for having this hidden rule. It just wasn't helping my situation to where I wanted to be.
And I think that's an important point that we need to make, is that within all cultures, there's good aspects and not so good aspects. Sure. And within all of the economic classes, there's going to be things for us personally that can be beneficial and not so beneficial within all of them. They all have really good things. I mean, like that closeness for generational poverty of the relations. You tend to move away from it a bit. Not that in middle class you don't have relationships or anything, but you don't value it the same way. It's different. Again, not right or wrong, just different. And so we all will have these personal aspects that challenge us within whatever community that we're identifying with. And for you, it was something that you found that was anchoring you to a place you didn't want to be.
Right, because the hidden rule that I had was that hidden rule. It wasn't blended with any other hidden rule. Now, you can take and combine these hidden rules and adapt them to your own and make that your culture, what you want it to be. Like for me, I still do that. When I get money, I still use it and spend it immediately on things. But I also conserve it and save it too, and use it towards the bills that it needs to go towards. So I have just kind of blended two hidden rules into one that is now my way of life that works for me. Because I still feel like entertainment is important to me. And so in order to do that, sometimes I got to spend some money, you know?
Well, and that goes back to why is this important for us to understand? It is that self-awareness so that we can better communicate with others. And it's also that awareness that things are not always going to be how we expect them to be. And when they aren't that way, what can we do? We can go back to that choice of dismissing it and assuming that someone is behaving a certain way because of our social expectations, or being curious and going up and doing the work that's necessary to understand why someone is doing what they are doing.
Right.
And that always comes back to communication. Never assume someone has that mindset if you don't actually know. If they have not personally told you that, that's part of that self-awareness, is to understand that and to be intentional about how you're communicating with other people.
So hidden rules are not good or bad. They're really about values and, learned behaviors over years, generations. And so we just want to make sure that we're touching on, like, there's no right or wrong that comes here. There's no good or bad. It's what they are. But there's definitely benefits that come along with learning about hidden rules and being able to cross over or expand your life or your situation. Also tearing down that judgment, really removing that judgment. So coming across somebody else who's doing something different than you is not doing it the wrong way. So again, learning hidden rules and about the different classes are pretty important. Today we were only able to touch on a small part of that. We do have the essential skills classes that you could attend to learn more, or meet with a coach one-on-one and learn some more about this. Thanks for joining us today, and we'll talk to you next time.
Thank you for joining us today. Community Action Partnership is a nonprofit organization. All the services we provide are free of charge to income qualifying community members. What we talked about today is just a bit of what we cover in our coaching and workshops. For more information, you can check out our website at cap4action.org. That's CAP, 4, action.org. You could also just give us a call at 1-800-326-4843 or come visit one of our locations. We would like to thank our sponsor, Optum Idaho, for making this series possible.